Hi, and welcome to Crime, Cults, and Creeps. If you're like me and you love diving into true crime, weird cults, and creepy cases, I hope you'll consider hitting the subscribe button and sticking around. Also, if you enjoy today's case, smash that like button and drop me a comment down below. I'm currently super busy working on lots of research for future episodes that I think you're going to love. I found some fun and intriguing cases. Also, if you have a case you think would be interesting for me to cover and research here on my channel, whether it's a true crime case, it involves a weird cult, or some kind of creepy historic case, just drop a comment down below, or you can shoot me an email at crimecultsandcreeps@gmail.com. Now, let's dive into the List family murders. The morning of November 9th, 1971 began like any other winter morning in Westfield, New Jersey. John List dropped his 3 children, Patty, Frederick, and John Jr., off at school on his way to work, while his wife Helen and his mother Alma remained home. But from that moment on, nothing about November 9th, 1971 would be normal for the List family. By the end of the day, Helen, Alma, Patty, Frederick, and John Jr. would all end up dead. John Emil List was born in Bay City, Michigan on September 17, 1925. He was the only child of German-American parents, John Frederick List and Alma Barbara Florence List. John and his family were very devout Lutherans, and John Frederick List Sr. taught Sunday school at their local church. John Jr. graduated from Bay City Central High School in 1943 and went on to enlist in the U.S. Army, where he served as a laboratory technician during World War II. List was discharged from the Army in 1946, and he promptly enrolled himself at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where he went on to earn a bachelor's degree in business administration as well as a master's degree in accounting. He was also commissioned a second lieutenant in his college's ROTC program. For those of you who are unfamiliar with ROTC, it is the Reserve Officers Training Corps program. It's a leadership training and development program that prepares full-time college-enrolled students for service opportunities in different branches of the armed forces of the United States. Though John had previously served in the military, utilizing the ROTC program at his college would offer him a furthering of his professional skill development, scholarship opportunities, tuition assistance, and an opportunity to further his military rank. In November of 1950, John was recalled to active duty to serve in the Korean War. While stationed at Fort Eustis in Virginia, he met a woman named Helen Morris Taylor. Helen was born on January 1st, 1924, in Guilford County, North Carolina. She had previously been married to a lieutenant in the Army, Marvin Everett Taylor, who had been killed while serving in the Korean War. Helen and Marvin had one daughter together, Brenda Joyce Taylor. Just 1 year after meeting, on December 1st, 1951, John and Helen got married in Baltimore, Maryland. The couple and Helen's young daughter Brenda then moved to Northern California, where John would serve in the Finance Corps. John finished his second tour of duty in 1952 and went to work first at an accounting firm in Detroit, Michigan, and then as an audit supervisor at a paper company in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It was during this time that he and Helen began to start their family. First, daughter Patricia Morris List was born on January 8, 1955, followed by son John Frederick List, or John Jr., born on October 21, 1956, and finally son Frederick Michael List, born August 26, 1958. By 1959, John had managed to accomplish a lot in his career. He had been promoted to the position of general supervisor at the company's accounting department, but his home life had begun to fall apart. Helen had become a very heavy drinker. Not only that, but her mental health had steadily begun to decline due to suffering from syphilis, a disease she had contracted from her first husband. In 1960, Brenda got married and left the family's home. John then relocated the remainder of his family, his wife, and his 3 children to Rochester, New York, where he landed a job with the Xerox company. There he climbed the corporate ladder to the position of Director of Accounting Services. In 1965, he accepted another prestigious job offer to become the comptroller at a bank in Jersey City, New Jersey. At this point, he moved his entire family, as well as his mother, who had been widowed during John's first tour of duty, into a 19-room Victorian-style mansion called Breeze Knoll, located in Westfield, New Jersey. Here, the family lived for 6 years, until the morning of November 9th, 1971. On that fateful day, the family began like any other morning, with their regular routines. John got up and got dressed, taking his 3 children to school while his wife Helen and his mother Alma remained at the family home. After dropping the children off at school, John then returned back to his family home. Before exiting his vehicle, he grabbed a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, as well as his father's Colt .22 revolver from the vehicle, and headed into the family's mansion. Once inside, he shot his wife Helen in the back of the head, then went up the stairs and found his mother Alma and shot her above her left eye. John then returned to his vehicle and drove to the local post office, the bank, and then back home. There he sat and patiently waited for his 3 children to return home from school. Eventually, Patty, John Jr., and Frederick all arrived home, and John promptly shot all 3 of the innocent children. Once the murders had been committed, John dragged the bodies of his wife and children into the ballroom of the family home, then took his mother's body upstairs to her attic apartment. John spent a little time cleaning the various crime scenes throughout the mansion before he wandered through the empty home and cut his face out of every single photograph in the house. Before he left the mansion for the last time, John turned on every single light in the home and then set a radio to play a local religious music station. It would take an entire month for the family to be discovered on December 7th, 1971. John had carefully thought out a plan to give himself plenty of time to escape. He had sent notes to both the children's schools as well as their part-time jobs, claiming they would be visiting an ailing grandmother in North Carolina for a few weeks. This really was not hard to believe. Helen's mother was, in fact, ill and had recently had to cancel a visit to Westfield. Lucky for her, she did that, because had she made that trip, John has since stated she would have been his 6th victim. John also stopped regular deliveries to the home, like milk, mail, and newspapers, so no one would notice them piling up at the front door. Neighbors did state that they noticed that the lights of the house remained on at all hours of the day and night, and they never saw the family, but this did not immediately spark any concern. Nobody thought to report anything because the family had always been a bit reclusive. In the weeks that followed the murders, the light bulbs slowly began to burn out, one by one, until the house was plunged into darkness. It was at this point the neighbors finally realized that something was amiss and called the police. When the authorities arrived, they were able to enter the home through an unlocked window to the basement, and they quickly discovered the family's bodies. They also discovered, in John's desk, a 5-page letter written to his pastor, in which he claimed he saw too much evil in the world and he had killed his family to save their souls. Westfield, New Jersey was a quiet town that had suffered very few violent crimes throughout history, but thanks to John List, the town was suddenly thrust into the national spotlight. The List family murders have often been referred to as the site of one of the most notorious felonies in New Jersey since the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby. A nationwide manhunt was immediately launched for John List, and the police investigated hundreds upon hundreds of leads with no success. All photographs of John had been destroyed, so they were unable to put out photos for people to look for him and recognize him with. The family's car, a green 1963 Chevrolet Impala sedan, was found parked at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City, but police were unable to find any evidence to prove that John had ever boarded a flight. It is important to remember at this time in the 1970s, flying was vastly different than it is now. Passengers who were flying on an airplane were not required to show the same type of identification that we do today, and there was not a widely used computer network system to track where everyone went and where everyone was going. It was easier to fly, and it was far easier to get completely lost in the crowd, which is exactly what John had managed to do. It is hard to imagine a time where no photos of a person were available. Today, everyone has a camera in their pocket, and they have hundreds of photos available online. There are security cameras mounted everywhere we go with images of us taken everywhere all the time. But back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, even though many families had cameras, there were not that many photos. Not anything compared to what you see today. So it was very easy for John to go through their home and destroy any photographic evidence of his identity. As the police continued to try to find any leads to follow, John's mother Alma's body was flown back to Frankenmuth, Michigan, where it was interred at the St. Lawrence Lutheran Cemetery. I am assuming it was near her deceased husband. Helen and the children were then buried at Fairview Cemetery in Westfield, New Jersey. No one ever lived in the Breeze Knoll mansion following the murders. It sat empty for about 9 months following the crime, and then it was sadly completely destroyed in a fire. Now, the fire was officially ruled as arson, but there were never any suspects, and the case has never been solved. The home was really quite an amazing sight to see. Along with the building itself being destroyed, it was rumored that in the ballroom where John had left his wife and children's bodies, there was a stained glass skylight that was a signed Tiffany original worth around $100,000 at that time, which equates to about $700,000 in today's money. Eventually, in 1974, after the house had burned down and the site had been cleared, a new home was finally built on the grounds. The FBI was eventually called in to help with the case, but without photographs of John to circulate around the nation, it was really hard to find any viable leads. Less than a month after the murders, one of America's most notorious crimes happened, the D.B. Cooper case. This is a favorite of a lot of people because it's exciting and adventurous, and most importantly, it was never solved. To this day, they're still not sure who D.B. Cooper really was. But for a short time, in 1972, John List made the top of the list of suspects to be D.B. Cooper. Now, the crime that John List committed happened within just 2 weeks of the D.B. Cooper case, and both men have been described as having very similar physical descriptions. And of course, the FBI reasoned that if someone's willing to murder their entire family, they have nothing left to lose. So it's really an easy leap to commit the wild crime that D.B. Cooper committed. But there was never any concrete evidence that connected John List to the crime. Years rolled by with no leads and no evolutions in the case. The Westfield police never gave up and continued to work on the cold case throughout the years. At one point, they hired Frank Bender, a forensic artist, and he constructed an age-progressed clay bust of what they believed that John List would look like as he continued to grow older and older. In May of 1989, the case would finally get the big break it had been waiting for. A wildly popular television series, America's Most Wanted, was in its freshman year on the Fox television network, and they decided to feature the John List murder case. The show chose to use Frank Bender's age-progressed clay bust of John List, and it was later discovered that this clay bust was absolutely spot on. On June 1st, less than 2 weeks after the case was aired on America's Most Wanted, John List was located and arrested in Richmond, Virginia, at an accounting firm after one of his former neighbors in Denver, Colorado, recognized the clay bust and the description and alerted authorities. So, what exactly had John been up to for almost 2 decades? Well, in 1971, immediately after he murdered his entire family, he traveled by train from New Jersey to Michigan and then on to Colorado. John settled in the Denver area in early 1972 and used the alias Robert Peter Bob Clark. The name was one of his former college classmates. The real Bob Clark was eventually interviewed and stated he never actually knew John List. John, now known as Bob, took a job at an accounting firm for a few years before moving on to become a comptroller at a paper box manufacturer located right outside of Denver, where he worked from 1979 until 1986. John built quite a life for himself while he was living as Bob. He joined the congregation of a Lutheran church and ran a carpool for the local church members that did not have reliable transportation. It was at a gathering for this very church that he met Army PX clerk Dolores Miller. The couple instantly fell in love and were married in 1985. In February of 1988, they moved into a home in the wealthy Brandermill neighborhood located in Midlothian, Virginia. John, still going by his alias Bob, resumed working as an accountant at a small accounting firm there called Madrea, Joyner, Kirkham, and Woody. While a former Denver neighbor sat down one evening to watch the new and incredibly popular television series America's Most Wanted, I doubt she knew the story that was about to unfold. After watching the episode, she realized immediately that the bust featured on that episode looked identical to her former neighbor, Bob Clark. She then made a phone call that would finally bring the case to a close. Police were able to trace John by using the alias Bob Clark to his current job in Virginia, and they were able to finally arrest him. For several months, John continued to claim that he was the real Bob Clark, and he had no idea who John List was, even after he was extradited from Richmond to Union County, New Jersey. Finally, as he was presented with undeniable evidence that included a fingerprint match from his military files as well as crime scene evidence, the ruse was up, and he finally confessed his true identity on February 16, 1990. Former neighbors, friends, and pastors of John's while he was a fugitive were absolutely shocked. They called the entire story unbelievable and nearly impossible. One person even stated that this is either the most unbelievable mix-up or he is the biggest con man to ever walk the earth. During the nearly 2 decades that he was on the run, he seemed to actually build a wonderful life for himself, develop lots of friendships, and be generally well-liked and well-regarded in the community. One friend, who chose to keep their identity secret, stated that at one point during his marriage to Dolores, he had told her that he had been married one time before, but his first wife was an alcoholic who died of cancer. He even told Dolores that it was a very slow and agonizing death. His second wife, Dolores, tried very hard to keep herself and her life private. She was shocked and in utter disbelief at first. It was reported that she hoped everything was just a big mistake. She couldn't believe that her husband, the man she knew, the man she loved, the man she trusted, she couldn't believe he would kill his entire family. Eventually, she gave one singular statement to the media. I was shocked to hear about Bob's arrest and what he is charged with. This is not the man I know. The man I know is kind, loving, a devoted husband, and a dear friend. He is a quiet yet friendly man who loves his work and the people he works with. John was taken to trial where he claimed that his financial problems had reached a crisis level in 1971 when he lost his job due to the closing of the Jersey City Bank. He was utterly humiliated. He wanted to keep the information from his family, so every morning he would get up, he would get dressed, and pretend to go to work. While he was out of the home during the day, he went to numerous job interviews and spent countless hours just reading at the train station until it was finally time to go home. He took money from his mother's bank account to keep the family finances afloat and to avoid defaulting on his mortgage, but eventually, as the year droned on, money became tighter and tighter. He knew he had to do something else. He pressed his children to seek part-time employment after school, under the ruse that it would help them build character and responsibility. All the while, he was really seeking the financial help it would bring him. During the trial, John recounted a lot of details about his life and his marriage. The entire time he was dealing with this financial crisis, things between him and Helen had really spiraled out of control. Her illness and her alcoholism were taking hold, and life was very difficult. He also divulged some very interesting details. He did not know that Helen had syphilis the majority of their marriage. She had managed to keep that a secret. Shortly after the couple had started dating, Helen told John that she was pregnant. Now, immediately, John was ready to marry her because that was the right thing to do back in the day, and that's just what you did. Helen then told him they had to go to Maryland to get married. John went along with it because, again, he's doing what he thought was right. Now, back when they got married, most states required a blood test from the bride and groom before the marriage could be done. And in that blood test, Helen's syphilis diagnosis would have come out. However, Maryland was one of the very few states that did not require that. So by getting married in Maryland, she was able to hide her syphilis from John. It also turned out that she was not pregnant and she had lied in order to trick him into marrying her. Throughout their marriage, John watched her health slowly decline, but he didn't know why. It wasn't until 1969 that her secret came out. Up until that point, Helen had managed to fool her husband, her family, and even her own doctors. But they pressed harder and harder for her to have a full examination, and she finally agreed. And it was at that time they discovered that she had syphilis. Now, when John heard this, of course, he was very upset. It had been decades that she had had this, and obviously there was a high chance that he had it. I never personally found whether or not he did in my research, but I can only assume that he likely did contract it. By the time Helen's diagnosis finally came, it was really just too late for her. The syphilis had taken hold of her, and her mental state had really begun to unravel. Combine that with her alcoholism, and, well, she could be quite a handful. John stated that she had become a paranoid recluse who was very dirty and very unkempt. She often, frequently, both in public and in private, humiliated him by comparing his sexual prowess to that of her first husband. During the trial, a psychiatrist was called in to evaluate John, and he stated that he believed John suffered from undiagnosed obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. In the state of John's life when he committed the murders, he likely only saw two solutions to his problems: accept welfare or kill his family and send their souls to heaven. He went on to state that for John, welfare would never be an acceptable option. It would expose both himself as well as his family to public ridicule and scrutiny and shame. It would also go against the very foundation that John's father had taught him with his authoritarian teachings about care and protection of one's family. Therefore, in John's mind, he likely only saw one real solution, and that was to kill his family. On April 12, 1990, John List was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder. During his sentencing hearing, though he denied any direct responsibility for what had happened to his family, he did state, "I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer." This statement did little to sway the judge's mind on the case, and the judge went on to state, "John Emil List is without remorse and without honor. After 18 years, 5 months, and 22 days, it is now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John F. List to rise from the grave." He then sentenced John to 5 separate life sentences to be served consecutively, which was the maximum sentence available at the time. John and his legal team went on to file appeals on the grounds that his judgment had been severely impaired by a post-traumatic stress disorder that stemmed from his time in the military. He also stated that the letter he had left behind in his desk at his family home, which authorities had viewed as a confession for the murders, should have been classified as a confidential matter with his priest, as any in-person confessional would have been at the time, and therefore should be inadmissible as evidence. The Federal Court of Appeals rejected all his arguments. Eventually, during a 2002 interview with Connie Chung, John expressed a bit of remorse for his crimes. He told her, "I wish I had never done what I did. I've regretted my action and prayed for forgiveness ever since." When she then followed up by asking why he didn't take his own life at the time, he told her that he believed suicide was a sin and would have permanently prevented him from being able to go to heaven, where he hoped to finally one day reunite with his family. On March 21st, 2008, John contracted pneumonia while imprisoned at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey, and he passed away from massive blood clots in both lungs. He was 82 years old. When the local paper reported his passing, they referred to him as the Boogeyman of Westfield. From there, local newspapers ran a few follow-up articles. Interestingly enough, when you take out your whole family, it seems that there's no one that wants to claim your body at your passing. No other remaining family members were ever identified, and the local medical examiner stated that eventually his remains would have to be returned to the Department of Corrections, as they were the last ones who had any custody of him. They did eventually reach out to his second wife, Dolores, but she refused to return their calls. This story hit me especially hard. These deaths, especially the 3 young innocent children, were a true tragedy. A man who couldn't stand a hit to his personal ego would rather take the lives of 5 people, 3 of them being his own children, and that's just nothing short of sick and depraved. While he was so sure he would be welcomed into heaven for his actions, I am certain a man like him was going to end up roasting down below. If you guys enjoyed this case, and I truly hope you did, let me know down below in the comment section. Again, take a minute and hit the like button and the subscribe button. And if you have a case that you think I would find interesting or you would love to hear me research, drop it below in the comments or hit me up with my email at crimecultsandcreeps@gmail.com. Until next time, have a great one, guys. Bye.